24 Major League Baseball draft that Cleveland Guardians select? I don't know. So I'm happy to answer any draft related questions. Go ahead. Or other questions, not just draft related questions.
Well, having number one, is it more relieving knowing that your board can be set and no one's ahead of you, or is it more pressure knowing that it's not one of the pick?
We look at this as an extraordinary and exciting opportunity for us. I mean, oftentimes when you're thinking about your first pick, you're trying to guess who's going to be off the board before you get an opportunity to select. This year, we don't have to guess. We know we have control over that. So now there are a lot of dynamics at play and a lot of things that will go into consideration for the first pick, but we know we don't have to rely upon other teams.
Can you give us a sense of what the pool of players maybe has been whittled down to, and maybe what it began with in terms of guys that you would consider?
It's really hard to say, Tom. I think one of the things we're excited about within this draft class is there's a number of good, high quality players available to us with the first pick. And we think that'll be the case actually with subsequent picks we have after the first pick. So that's probably the best direction I can give you, is that there's a group of players that we would be excited about bringing into the organization with the first pick.
Do you know who you want? I mean, since you've had all this time to study these guys, have you zeroed in on one guy?
Well, we're still working through. We had meetings today. We've actually had meetings all week. There's a group still meeting right now. We have meetings tomorrow, meetings Friday. So I think there are two things that will go into our decision. First and foremost, the thing we are trying to solve for organizationally is use the resources and draft capital we have available to us to bring in the most talented group possible. And that's really what we're solving for. And we think, when we look up at the end of the draft, we'll feel good about the group of players we bring into the organization.
Chris, you guys haven't had over a decade, let alone number one. What is there any difference to the actual process of preparing for a number one pick, especially this year when you find out in very surprising fashion that you're going to be?
I think it just allows us to focus our energy on a different pool of players, at least for that pick. But we're still getting literally hundreds of players throughout the draft, and our process is, we try to be pretty thorough. Our goal with our scouting process is for there not to be any surprises. So when a player joins our organization, we know what they do well, we know what their areas of development are, and we know what makes them tick as people. And we spent, the better part of more than the last year, actually. We have history with a lot of these guys for multiple years. We've tried to take advantage of every moment we've had to get to know this draft class as best we can, not only for the first pick overall, but picks that we'll subsequently make after that, because you guys are all familiar with the draft. You can see, just look at our contributions we're getting for players on our roster right now. There are guys that come from all places in the draft, and that's why the totality of the group is so important for us. While we recognize, yes, the number one pick is important, that shouldn't be the only thing that defines our draft.
Other sports, number one picks are usually expected to contribute right away. Baseball is just a completely different animal with the minor league system. But when you have the top pick in the draft, do you factor in major league readiness or a timeline in your head of when you think that player might be ready?
That's not a primary driver for us. I think our goal is that, as I said, we're really trying to make the most of the dollars and resources and picks that we have available to us to yield the best talent pool overall. And whether that's high school players, college players, pitchers, position players, we're really open-minded.
Saturday, you talked about having a depth of knowledge that you wouldn't necessarily have had in the past of this, the top of this class, past years. Does that benefit you beyond this year in terms of making acquisitions, and trade deadlines 2, 3, 4 years from now?
It's hard to predict, but generally, speaking in generalities, yes, that absolutely helps us. The work we do in the amateur scouting process pays dividends for us down the road as we, have opportunities to acquire players once they enter professional baseball. And that really doesn't only apply to the first pick; it applies to, any player that we do the work on right now. Because Kyle Manzardo is like a good example of a guy that, we did a lot of work on as an amateur, got selected by Tampa. Then later we're engaged in conversations with the Rays, and we were able to rely back on some of that information we had when he was, coming out of college.
For us, where you're picking top or in the middle of the first round, what are the biggest differences between the draft process now versus 8, 5, 10 years ago?
Well, I mean, obviously the draft has gone through a lot of structural changes. We went from an entirely just open draft process where there wasn't draft slots, there wasn't a draft pool, and now we're in a pooled system with slots and certain requirements on guys that go to the combine and certain amounts that you have to offer. So I guess the way we look at that is, our job's to understand what the current rules are, what are the realities, and how do we do the best we can to make the best decisions for our organization within the confines of the rules. Sure.
Take us back to, I'm sure you talked about this at the winter meetings, but can you just kind of take us back to that moment when you find out picking number one? I should talk to the Reds. I talked to Nick Kroll about that.
Yeah.
He had a funny story just mentioning how shocked he was.
Yeah, we were focused at the time. Again, we're tracking that that's happening, but we had a 2% chance of having the first pick. So as we're thinking about where our bandwidth is at the winter meetings, we were spending a lot of time working through trades, Rule 5 considerations, and then we were walking into the draft, and I see Bart starts to have some conversations with someone. It's like, hey, then he comes over and it's like, I think I was meeting with the media group, and I excused myself and went over to talk to Bart, and he said, hey, you may want to stick around after this. And then I started thinking, can that really be possible? What would be the things that I would need to stick around for? And the first pick was obviously one of those things. And so at that point, I started to have an inkling. And then when we finished with the media, Bart shared like, yeah, it's happening. So things sped up pretty quickly then. But obviously, needless to say, I was elated, and it was an exciting time for our group. Bart, is that about right on how it happened?
You were comfortable what you were wearing.
Okay. Of the things I was thinking about, what I was wearing probably didn't really register. Yeah.
Why I blamed and you're like, yeah, I'm okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chris, without getting too deep into kind of the financial needs of it all,
Yeah.
can you explain there's like a $10.5 million slot, right, for
Mhm.
one pick, and how does that work as well?
Yeah, I mean, effectively, that's the slot value that's assigned for that pick. The way it works is each pick that a team has, not only through their first pick, but all the way through 10th round, you have assigned slot values, and the total of those slot values represents the entire pool of money you have to allocate to signing bonuses for players. And so you can allocate that pool mostly however you'd like to try to sign whichever group of players you ultimately select. Now, there are some restrictions based upon, relative to slot value, based upon whether or not guys attend the combine and the medical portion of a combine. Then you need to offer at least 75% of that slot value. But with that exception, teams are free to negotiate with players to find out what makes sense. So there are opportunities to do deals that are below slot, as well as opportunities to do deals that are above slot throughout the draft. And if you look at our history, we've done both of those things. And that's why when people ask, well, who are you taking with the first pick? It's a combination of factors for us, because what we're seeking to do is optimize that total pool. And some of that is based upon the ability and our assessment of the player, but also how much it would take to sign that player as we think about the totality of the group and how else we might be able to use those resources.
Of the small pool that you might be looking at the number one pick, have you watched some of those guys play?
Yes.
Would you like to name?
No. I appreciate you. I know you need to ask. So, yeah. Yes. Yes, right around that. Mhm. This is the largest draft pool that any team has had. Some of that's based upon inflation. I want to say around 10.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't know this, but so.
It's okay.
that draft pool, where's that money come from? Is that Paul Dolan's money, or how does that?
It comes from whatever revenue we generate. So
Okay.
whether that's ticket sales, TV
But-
rights,
but
but it's
you know,
yes. There's
you
no
know-
fund out there for Major League Baseball to cover those
Yeah,
picks. We
so I
have
mean,
to,
yeah.
yep.
I didn't know.
Yep, that's money we have to spend. Appreciate the question, Jeff. Anytime you have questions like that, don't hesitate to ask. Happy to try to clarify. Most of the times I might confuse, but when I can, I'll try to clarify. Yeah.
One more thing I'm curious about in terms of evaluating this year's class, and especially recent years, college baseball, the offensive environment is, I feel like, higher than we've seen in years. How have you guys gone about trying to evaluate years at the college level when offense is kind of where?
It's like you're sitting in our draft room. That's one of the things we talk about is the, not just the performance, but what's the context for that performance. And you talked about the run environment in college baseball. I mean, there are all sorts of things that we have to try to weigh, whether that's quality of high school competition, geographically where guys play. Do they play in the SEC versus the Pac-12 versus the ACC? We're trying to factor in all of those different considerations, and it's not an easy thing to do, but those are all the different variables we try to weigh. And because the run environment in college baseball is very different today than it was 10 years ago.
I'm really drafted.
Yeah.
How excited are you at 2000? And what was the, to be able to see the organization play on that big stage and have two guys there? How excited are you?
Yeah, it's an exciting time for Rafi and for Jason, and great opportunities for them to have a more than anything. It's just a great experience for young players to go around and be around some of the best young players in the game. So hopefully in the best view of the world is that's another developmental opportunity for them that can help them on their path to becoming major league players. And in both their cases, they've worked really hard and overcome some obstacles to get to this point. And so hopefully they embrace the moment and enjoy it. I'll certainly enjoy watching them play and compete.
If I could change to the present.
Sure.
The EJ year